You have been lied to. Ideas shape lives, and on this show, we always tell that ideas have consequences. And nowhere is that clearer than in the way we eat. The food culture around us isn't neutral. We've been lied to about carbs being the foundation to our health, and it's led to an epidemic in obesity, insulin resistance, and diabetes. If I look like a young boy who just went to a candy store or just had his dream come true, it's because one of my heroes is on the show today. That is Professor Tim Noakes. Professor Tim Noakes, welcome.
Thanks, Rainer. Lovely to be with you and looking forward to the next hour or so.
Looking forward as well on my side. Just to introduce you guys to the man sitting in front of me, Professor Noakes has studied at the University of Cape Town, UCT, where he obtained his MB-CHB degree and a medical doctorate degree and a doctorate of science in medicine, in exercise science specifically. He is now the adjunct professor at the Cape Peninsula University of Technology at CPUT, which is South Africans would know. Following his retirement from the research unit of exercise science and sports medicine in 1995, In 1995, he was the co-founder of the now prestigious Sports Science Institute of South Africa. He has been rated an A1 scientist by the National Research Foundation of South Africa for a fifth-year term. In 2008, he received the Order of Mapungubwe Silver from the President of South Africa for his excellent contribution in the field of sports science and physical science. Prof. Noakes has published more than 750 books and articles. He has been cited more than 21,000 times in the scientific literature and has an H index of 77. For those of you who don't know that, that is a prestigious way that scientists measure their academic success. What it means is if you've written 10 papers and your 10 papers have been cited 10 times, you have an H index of 10. Professor Noakes has an astounding H index of 77. He has authored many books. In 2003, he received the UCT Book Award for The Law of Running, considered to be the Bible for runners. Since 2011, he has written his autobiography, Challenging Beliefs, Memoirs of a Career, and he published Waterlog, the serious problem of overhydration in endurance sports. I bet you guys didn't hear of that one yet, overhydration. That's not what we're being told. And then he also in 2013 published The Real Meal Revolution, which he co-authored with John Proudfoot, David Greer, and Sally Ann Creed. And followed that with the chart-focused version of the book, Raising Superheroes. In the latter of the two are now published overseas. In 2014, he also co-wrote Always Believe in Magic with Kevin. Oh, sorry, I can't see that surname yet. Musikanth. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Sorry?
Yeah, Musikanth, that's right.
And Jonathan Kaplan, which is the story of how the UCT Ike Tigers journeyed to winning the 2014 Varsity Cup. The Banting Pocket Guide was published in 2017, co-authored with Benedict Douglas and Bridget Allen. And most recently, he has co-authored The Law of Nutrition with Marika Saboros. This details his journey from prosecution to innocence. Following the publication of the best-selling book, The Real Meal Revolution, he founded the Noakes Foundation, the focus of which is to raise funding to support the quality research of the eating plan described in the book. He is now the co-founder and chief medical director of the Nutrition Network and devotes a majority of his time promoting the low-carbohydrate, high-fat diet, especially for those with insulin resistance, and raising funds for Eat Better South Africa and research through the Noakes Foundation. He is highly acclaimed in his field and at the age of 72 is still physically active, taking part in races up to 21Ks. That is a mouthful, and if I trampled a bit over my words there, it's because I'm a bit nervous for today. But really, guys, this is the expert of experts when it comes to diet. And specifically that book, The Real Meal Revolution, is what changed my life. So it's an honor for me to have you on the show, Dr. Noakes. Welcome once again.
Thank you again.
As I said earlier, we're going to speak about the lie about carbohydrates. But before we get into that, I would first, just a few biographical questions. How did you get into nutrition, and sports science and medicine?
Okay, so I got into medicine because Chris Barnard performed the first human heart transplant in Cape Town at Groote Schuur Hospital in December 1967. And that influenced me hugely. And so I woke up one morning and decided I had to study medicine. So I went into it because I didn't have a clue. I'd already been out of school for a year and a half, and I didn't know what I was going to do. So I then applied for medicine, got into medicine. And when I started at medical school, I started doing prolonged exercise. So I started rowing competitively, and then I started running. And I became much more interested in the physiology of sport, and particularly endurance activities. And so that was what I focused on. And I passed my medical degree without knowing anything about treating patients. I refused to use medication, which was astonishing. I mean, even then, I thought that there was a healthier way to treat patients. It wasn't by prescribing drugs. So I then, fortunately, I did my internship and realized I'm really not a clinician. My job is to understand what causes things to go wrong. And so I wanted to write the textbook rather than learn the textbook, because in medicine, you have to learn the textbook in order to advance. And so I went directly into research, and then I found a career in sports science. I was fortunate because sports science didn't exist when I started in medicine. And then the production of Nike running shoes changed everything. And people don't really understand that. But it was Nike running shoes which made running professional. And that forced professional athletes, or it allowed professional athletes to be employed to compete in the Olympic Games. And that then those athletes needed help. And that was the reason why sports science started. It was to help the athletes perform better. So I was right there at the right time. And, you know, you don't realize what things change. So Chris Barnard's operation was critical to me. Secondly, the production of running shoes and the development of sports science. So that's how I started. And I did fine in sports science. And as you said, I was well recognized until 2010. And that's when I changed my diet. And then things fell out, because now I was exposing the lies, as you said, in my profession. And my profession took it very badly, as did my university. So my university publicly humiliated me and said that I was going to kill, I was a danger because I was promoting a non-grain-based diet. That was the key. It wasn't grain-based. And the whole basis for nutrition advice is you've got to eat a grain-based diet. And of course, that runs back to the industry, the grain industries, which make fortunes out of selling these grains, which we don't really need. So that was, and then I went to court for 4 years to clear my name, which I did. I won 13-0 in the decisions. And finally, people are beginning to realize that the cause of the obesity is, as you said, obesity and insulin resistance, is this high carbohydrate diet. And we took out animal produce out of our diet. And far from being harmful, animal foods are what keep us healthy, as you personally discovered and your family discovered. So that's my story of how I got to where I am. And I've been so fortunate because the trial, as a result of the trial, I was invited to do some research with Philip Prince, who's an ex-South African living in America, runs a brilliant laboratory. And we started researching the performance effects of the low carbohydrate diet. And we found that there's zero difference. You can eat what you like. It doesn't influence your performance. And we did the definitive study of that. And we have another study coming out quite soon, which is an absolutely epic study of marathon runners. Over 2 years, these guys changed their diet. They went from high carbs to high fat, and then a group did the opposite. And they again confirmed exactly what we said. What you eat before exercise has zero impact. If it's high carbs or high fat, doesn't impact your performance. But we showed that what you take during exercise has a huge effect. And so in our laboratory studies, we had a 21% increase in performance in people when they took 10 grams of carbohydrate an hour, just a tiny, tiny, tiny amount of carbohydrate during exercise. And that now destroys the whole argument that you've got to load with carbohydrate before exercise. And then during exercise, you also have to eat 120 grams of carbohydrate an hour. That is criminal because, again, it's not evidence-based and it's
Wow.
just driven by industry. And we showed you 10 grams per hour is the maximum that you need. And all you need to do is to keep your blood glucose normal during exercise. Because if your blood glucose falls, then your performance goes off.
So would that be doing in high intense exercise or any exercise?
And with exercise has to go on for a long time because you have to deplete your liver of glucose, and that may take 2.5 hours. And then it becomes important that you take a bit of glucose. So in a short duration exercise, no, your liver's fine. It doesn't run out of glucose.
So the normal person out there would actually never need to increase their carb intake to 10 grams?
Never.
Wow. I would like to get...
Or, of course, increase their carbs before the exercise.
Yes. I would like to get into the science of it a bit later on. But one of the other biographical things about you that stood out to me is that in South Africa, you're not only seen as a hero because of what you did with your meal revolution, but even before that, you were well liked with what you did in the sports science field, but also you've attributed or contributed to the Springboks winning the 2007 World Cup. Would you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, and if it hadn't been for some funny referees' decisions, we might have won the 2011 World Cup as well.
Yeah, that's true.
But so what happened in 2007 when Jake White was appointed in 2004? He called me into his office and he said, "Prof, I'd like you to help me prepare the team for the World Cup in 2007. So I said to him, "Well, who's your team going to be?" Remember, I asked him this in 2004, and he wrote out a list, and he had virtually all the players who played in the finals were there.
Wow.
And so I said, "No, that's no problem. Well, if these are the players, all we have to do is make sure they rest up enough in the year leading up to the competition. Not the year of the competition. The year before is the key year that you've got to manage their playing time." And so he took that on board. And for example, I said, the first thing you don't do is you don't take your leading players to England at the end of the year in 2006. And he didn't. And he lost a game and he nearly lost his job because he lost to England. And then I said, and the next year, that's 2007, when we were playing Australia and New Zealand, I said, you don't take your key players. You rest key players in the tour. They don't go to play in Australia and New Zealand. He did that. And again, well, it was really interesting because the first game against Australia, they were leading 27-0 after 10 minutes. And this was with the second team. I think the second team eventually lost. But that really shook up a lot of people. And that often happens when you get players who are rested and given the opportunity, they just exceed their potential or they do unusual. So that's what he did. And when he played the final, on the day of the final, he had 30 players. All of them were healthy. He could have chosen all 30. And they're the first team that played the final without substitution. So they played 80 minutes with the same 15 players. I think John Smith went off for a blood injury, but otherwise they played for the 80 minutes. And so that was also unusual. Of course, we didn't have bomb squads in those days.
Yes, I just wanted to say, as before, Rossi changed everything.
And that was, and afterwards he said that had been critical. I also spoke to the team before they left, and I said they had to believe that they could win, and they had to go there knowing that they were going to win, and they bought into that idea. That wasn't my idea. That was just confirming what Jake had done. Wow. So it was very rewarding because, I mean, I took so much flack in the media. And I wasn't an expert on rugby, but I was an expert on running and overtraining. And Bruce Fordyce had taught me, that's critical. What you do in the lead up to the competition is absolutely critical. And he always said, you mustn't win the games, the races that don't matter. You have to win the race, the race that matters. And that's all we said to Jake. You've got to hold back your horses until you're ready for the final. That's when you release the energy. And that's what Erasmus has taken to the extreme. I mean, We just rested players. He's rotated players brilliantly, which is obviously the best way to go.
Yeah, he's managed to build a really deep squad.
Yeah.
But on Erasmus, that the current coaching team ever call you up to maybe help them out, or
no, I think
in terms of nutrition or so forth?
Well, that's interesting because Rusty's health has improved dramatically in the last 6 months or so. And the only thing that can be that he's gone low carbs. That's the only thing. And there are teams in South Africa, and I don't want to mention names, who are low carbs. There are rugby teams that are low carbs. And they've found performance improvements and reduced injury rates. And that's what I proposed, was that if you get the players to not be inflamed, because the carbohydrate diet inflames you all the time. And I watch with great interest the other teams, because you can tell which teams are low carbs and which aren't. The low carb teams, their forwards tend to have a little bit of extra weight, extra fat around their middle. And if you see that, you know that team's not high carb, is high carbs. The one guy really helped was David Pocock, who was the Wallabies, who was a Zimbabwean, who went to Australia. And he wrote to me. Now, he's the guy who destroyed South Africa in the 2011 quarterfinals.
Yeah, I remember that.
You remember that? Because he was cheating the whole way. And the referee was letting him get away with it. But he wrote to me and I said, David, if you'd come to South Africa, I would have shot you. I was so angry with you. Anyway, he said that he had gone to Australia, and he was essentially vegan and very, very high carbs. And he'd read The Real Meal Revolution, and he changed his diet. He said it was magnificent. He's got one of the best bodies you've ever seen on a football player, on a rugby player. And so he went high fat, and he said his performances went even better than before. So that was an interesting observation. So here was one of the world's best players. And the other one is Peter Steph du Toit. I mean, he lives on a farm here in Wellington. He was born in the farm. He's never eaten it. I doesn't know what cereals are. He just eats meat. And look at his physique and look at his ability to perform. And people just ignore that. He's just a one-off. It's not true. I think if you look at the majority of the South African locks and flankers over the years, I'm sure you'll find that they had a high intake of meat.
Even if I think of Jesse Kuhl's physique, I can't think that that's a high carb diet that he's on.
No, absolutely not.
But
so that answers your question. I think that the Springboks. There was a picture before the 20.
I just wanted to ask that. Yes.
The most recent World Cup. They show the picture of the Springboks. They were stand in the change room without clothes on, and I mean, I couldn't believe the physiques. They were immaculate, and people said, well, if you're going to beat that team, you're going to have to be pretty good. So I suspect that the low carb movement has moved into the Springboks, so they don't need any advice from me. They're already doing it.
Wow, they already got it. Yeah. So you've mentioned you touched on some of the persecution you faced. So before I get into the segment, I just want to share something. So I don't want to say my field of expertise, but the field that I'm in is theology and apologetics. And one of the things we use in apologetics is to assess whether the disciples' testimony about Jesus' resurrection was true or not, is to look at the motives, to look at, there are mainly three motives. Usually it's money, sex, or power. And they didn't receive any of those for they were lying about what they were telling us. And actually the opposite happened. Everybody except one was killed for what they would say. Yes. And if to stand in the face of that persecution and still telling what they believe to be true is a testimony to that they really believe it's true. And I think, and I've told this to other people, if I look at what you've went through in your career this last decade or so, I think just the fact that you kept with what you believe is true, and actually not just what you believe is true, but what the evidence shows is true. Yeah, it shows a lot. So I want to get into before we get into the carb thing specifically, you've already started doing and debunking a lot of myths, and the book Waterlog comes to mind. Would you tell us a little bit about the myth you've debunked there?
Okay, so when I started running marathons, we were not allowed to drink for the first half of the first 3/4 of the marathon. I mean, that was the rule. And I remember going to a meeting of the South African Athletics Association, and the guys told me, no, we don't allow water in a 100-meter race, so we're not going to allow water in a marathon. So I became a great advocate for we needed water in marathons. And it did change. By 1976, you were now allowed to take quite a lot of water, and the Olympic Games allowed drinking much more frequently, not as frequently as today, but much better. And then in 1981, what happened was the comrades, because they couldn't have so many cars on the course looking after individual athletes, they started putting down their own sickening stations, and they chose to do it every mile. So now you had a drink station every mile. This is now 1981. And that was a complete change. So you can imagine we're going from nothing to a complete surplus. And if you speak to the old comrades runners, like Jackie Meckley was a great friend of mine, he drank 4 drinks. He would take 4 drinks during a comrades, and he would win the race, and he wouldn't be dehydrated and he wouldn't die. So anyway, 1981, after the comrades, I received a letter from a lady in Johannesburg saying that she'd run the race, and at 70 kilometers, her husband had stopped her. He was seconding her. He could get on the course, and she didn't recognize him. So he figured there's something going on with her brain. So he took her out the race and took her to the finish, where she was diagnosed with dehydration and given 2 liters of fluid. And during the process, she went unconscious. And so he said, you guys aren't helping her. You're making her sicker. So he took her, put her in the car, and drove her to Durban. And halfway to Durban, she had a grand mal seizure. So she went unconscious. And so here you have a lady who starts the comrades, fit enough to qualify to run, having trained and marathons, and now she's at death's door. So she arrives in Addington Hospital, and fortunately she's seen by a guy who doesn't talk about dehydration or you're obviously dehydrated. He examines her properly, measures her blood sodium concentration, and it's extremely low. So she writes to me and she said her blood sodium level had dropped very low. And then it had recovered slowly over 4 days. She was unconscious for 4 days, and then she'd recovered. So she said to me, what happened? And I said, I have no idea. It's never been described before. So I started examining it and finding athletes who'd had the same problem. There was another athlete in the comrades that year. And by 1985, we'd worked out that they'd overdrunk. They'd drunk too much, which you must understand was completely antithetical, because they were being told, you've got to drink to prevent dehydration and death from dehydration. So we eventually, the next year, I think one of my students went to Durban, and in the medical tent, he saw all the patients who had got low sodiums and who were unconscious. And they were treated, and he measured their balance of fluid and sodium, and he showed that they were all fluid overloaded. And one athlete had increased his body weight by 6 kilograms. So it increased his weight, water retention, by 6 kilograms. Wow. And his sodium was very low. And they all got better as soon as they started passing the water. So we knew what the problem was. We wrote it up. And this was exactly the time when a product called Gatorade was being sold in America. And Gatorade was based on the idea that you've got to drink to excess. You mustn't lose any weight. And so that brought me into conflict with the American College of Sports Medicine. I'd previously been one of their doyens in exercise science, and suddenly I was rejected completely. No one wanted to speak to me. And the papers we wrote were often discarded on the basis that they don't know what they're talking about, sort of thing, instead of looking at the data. So, but eventually we won, and the guidelines were changed. We were the first to change the guidelines, which were implemented in the New York City Marathon for the first time. And they were so that they controlled how much fluid was taken in by the athletes, and that the problem disappeared. But by that time, there'd been something like 20 deaths in athletes and triathletes and other people, and military. The military was a major problem because they were being told to overdrink as well. But we wrote the book, and it's a brilliant book because what I do is I look at the history and go back to what did people talk about in the 1900s, because there were brilliant scientists then. And they did work that we've not been able to do again because they had free access to do what they liked. They could study athletes under all sorts of difficult circumstances. For example, one guy, Jerome Conn, in the war, he was asked to explain what would happen if the military went and fought in the Philippines and in the islands there of Asia, because it was so hot and the US troops were arriving there and they were collapsing. So he had free rein to do what he liked, and he took conscientious objectives, and he would exercise them for 6 hours a day in the heat and give them no sodium in their diets to see what happened. And so we couldn't do those sorts of experiments anymore. And these guys were brilliant, but no one reads them or writes about them. And I just dug that material up, and then we'd done a lot of research as well. And when you look at the whole picture, it's obvious what had been going wrong. So that's how we did it. We did the research, and we looked back at the old research, which people had forgotten about.
Do you think the pushback you've received kind of prepared you or gave you a taste of what's to come?
Oh yeah, definitely. And you're quite right. It was a learning process, but I knew one thing, that the truth always wins.
That's true.
So as long as you're on the truth, it doesn't matter what they say. They haven't got truth on their side, and ultimately they'll be exposed. And that happened beautifully to me during the COVID crisis and the vaccination story and so on. And one of the professors said I should go back to university because they hadn't taught me correctly. And what I said was true, and eventually it came out to be true. And so here's this professor who's shown to be lying because he said something that wasn't true. And so he has to live with that, and people could look at it and see he doesn't tell the truth. But I told the truth, and I was attacked in the media because the media is also complicit in this whole problem.
Yes, that is definitely true. That is definitely true. So before we get into the science part of it, I want to get into your own low-carb, high-fat journey. Tell us a bit about how this journey began.
Okay, very easily. On December the 10th, 2010, I went for a run, and I had a terrible run. And there's a little hill outside our house, and I came up to the top, and I thought I was going to die. My heart rate was so high, and I felt so terrible. And I arrived home, and I happened to open my emails, and there was an advert for a book which said lose 10 kilograms in 10 weeks or something like that, without hunger. And that was the key, without hunger. And it was written by 3 people who I knew very well, Doctors Westman, Volek, and Finney. And the title of the book was Atkins, had Atkins in the title. So I said, how can these people be promoting Atkins? Because he tried to kill us by making us eat saturated fat. I was absolutely devastated. I said, these are heroes of mine, and they've sold out to Atkins. I have to go and find out what happened. So I went down to the bookshop. I bought the book. It was the last copy they had. And I started reading it immediately. Because it was the moment, for some reason, that was the moment. So I read it, and within 3 hours, I said, oops, I've been wrong for 33 years. These guys are right. And how did I know? Because they had 150 studies, which I'd never heard about. So I thought I knew something about sports nutrition, and there were 160 papers that I'd never read. And they were all published in good journals. So I realized the censorship happening in some way, that I was not aware of those papers. Probably my blind spot as well, but probably there was some censorship involved. So then that day I said, okay, no more carbs. And I started at lunchtime that day. And I've essentially not eaten carbs since then. So that's now 15 years ago. And it was dramatic because within 2 days I started to feel amazing. And the answer was I was diabetic then. I was frankly diabetic. And so the fact that I would cut the carbs immediately dropped my blood glucose, and I started to feel better. And then I went on medication, and now my diabetes is in remission. I've still got diabetes. In other words, if I take literally 30 grams of carbohydrate, my glucose spikes through the roof. And that's how resistant I am. Why am I resistant? Bad family history. I've got very bad genes from both my father and my grandfather on both sides. So, and then I ate this high carbohydrate diet, and then I ran a lot. And I think the combination of lots of carbs and lots of running and family history, that's very bad. And we're slowly beginning to pick that up. That more and more young athletes are being detected as pre-diabetic because our detection techniques are improving. So now we can detect pre-diabetes much earlier than we could in the past. And as soon as you apply it to lots of athletes who are running a lot and eating high carbs, you see there's a significant prevalence of pre-diabetes.
Wow.
So they're fine because they're not yet diabetic, but give them 10 years and they will be diabetic.
That is very scary because you would look to those people and think they are the healthy ones. Wow.
I'm reading a book by a great friend of mine who I converted 5 years ago to the diet. He's a wonderful doctor in the United States. And he was running 220 marathons. So he's a medical doctor. He's running 220 marathons. He slows a bit. And then he suddenly realized that he's pre-diabetic. He was tested and that he had all the evidence that he was pre-diabetic. And he suddenly realized, that's why I don't feel so good. I'm falling asleep and I'm irritable and so on. And all that cleared as soon as he went low carbs again. But he, just like me, if he looks at carbohydrates, his blood glucose goes out of control. So we are we used to call this brittle diabetics. We are brittle diabetics. And the only way you can cope is just don't eat carbohydrates at all.
Wow, that is completely counterintuitive to what we've been taught since school.
Yeah.
You've touched, before we get to the persecution part, tell us a bit about the real meal revolution and also the cauliflower shortage you guys caused in Cape Town.
Yes, it was very funny. So what happened with the book was it certainly wasn't my idea. And I think it was Sally Creed's idea. I can't recall now. So what happened was that Jono Proudfoot, David Greer was the other author, and David was running the wall of China, I should say. And he ran the whole with somebody else, and they got stuck in Mongolia with no food. And the Mongolians said, there's only one thing that'll get you through this race is pork fat. You have to eat pork fat. That's all. As long as you're eating pork fat, you'll get to the finish. The Mongols have always lived on this high fat diet. So he started and they finished the race comfortably. And when he arrived back in Cape Town, he spoke to Sally Ann Creed. And he said, we really need to write a book for athletes about a high fat diet. So Sally Ann Creed said, well, we should get Tim Noakes involved. So they spoke to me and I wasn't really interested. And for a year, nothing happened. And then all of a sudden, John Oakes said, listen, we've got 3 weeks to finish this book. So we went from having done nothing for a year, and now we had 3 weeks. And so we put the book together in about 3 weeks, which is ridiculous. I mean, we normally take months and years to write books. And we produced it on time. And the interesting thing was that when Jono went to approach the best publisher in Cape Town, there was someone who took the phone call and said, no, we don't want that book, a high-fat diet, blah, 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 and put the phone down. And so Jono went to another publisher who said, gosh, this is amazing. And they made a fortune out of the book. Wow. So that lady has never been forgiven for throwing it out. So anyway, we wrote the book and it just went like that. It was a magic. And it became one of the best-selling books on diets in the history. And everyone loved it because they all started losing weight, and as you know. So it was really interesting. And again, it was complete chance that it actually happened. If David Greer hadn't run and met the Mongols in Mongolia, we wouldn't have had any reason to write the book.
Wow. And so, like you said, the book flew off the shelves. We were one of the families who bought the book. But something interesting that I think was a really funny story about it is you guys caused a cauliflower shortage in Cape Town.
That's right, because one of the recipes you replaced potatoes, I think, with cauliflower or whatever. And so that was, that happened. Yeah. So that was
That's
a measure
amazing.
of how many people were you following the diet.
That is amazing. So obviously, as you said, the book flew off the shelves and you guys gain a lot of traction, a lot of support, but you also gain a lot of enemies, if you can say it like that.
Yeah.
So tell me a bit more about the persecution you faced, specifically at the university, but then I want to speak a bit about that famous trial that you went through.
Yeah. So the funniest thing, well, this is funny in retrospect. I mean, it wasn't funny at all when it happened. So my wife and I, it's now, which year was it? It was 2014. 2014. My wife and I go for a weekend away at one of the game parks nearby. And so I get there and it's evening and I open my emails and there's an email from the University of Cape Town Medical School from the Dean of the Medicine's secretary. And she says that we are sending this letter to the Cape Times on Monday morning. You might want to respond. So this is, I'm told, Friday night, and the letter's going to appear Monday morning in the Cape Times. And basically, it accused me of all sorts of things. And what had happened that week was, on the Monday, I'd given a lecture to Parliament, the wellness group at Parliament. It wasn't to the parliamentarians, it was to a wellness group. In other words, all the people working in Parliament. And it was about the book. And in fact, I never mentioned the book once, not mentioned it. I was just talking about the diabetes epidemic. I said there's a diabetes epidemic and you guys need to do something about it. So afterwards, the Speaker of the House came up to me with his book and he asked me to sign it. So I did. And then the photographer from the Cape Times put this, so this on the Tuesday morning, this appears on the front page of the Cape Times. Front page, front picture, the book, myself, and the Speaker of the House. So Wednesday morning, the Dean of the University of Cape Town, his secretary informs him about this picture, and he decides to take action. So he gets the three of the main professors at the university, at the medical school, to write a letter to the Cape Times, accusing me of promoting this diet, and it's clearly going to harm everyone, and there's no scientific basis for it. And he doesn't give any scientific evidence why it's wrong. It's wrong. And I said it's wrong, so it's wrong. I'm the Dean of Medicine. So he sends this letter to the Cape Times, and I respond over the weekend. And the Cape Times at least did publish what my response. And then that letter was used by the Health Professions Council as proof that the University of Cape Town and all decent medical schools, all clever medical schools, were against Noakes. And so the Health Professions Council then had a claim against me for a tweet that I did. And I was reported by the head of the South African Dietetics Association. She reported to me because she saw this tweet, and 9 hours later, she'd reported me to the Health Professions Council and said they had to take action. So the committee, then the Health Professions Council forms a committee, and they looked at the complaint and they said, we don't know. We don't know whether it's worth taking this further or not. However, when this letter arrives at them, because it's now people are informing them that I'm not so good and the University of Cape Town thinks I'm a renegade, etc. Then they said, you see, that's all the evidence we need. The University of Cape Town Medical School disagrees with Noakes, so therefore we should take action against him. So then I was charged. And originally I just looked at the charge and I said, this is ludicrous. It was a seven-word tweet. And I thought, how can you charge someone for a tweet? And then eventually I realized it was serious. I went to my lawyer and then we started, and it took 4 years, including 27 days in court to reverse it over 4 years. And we won comfortably. And that was the end of it, I thought. But the university has never apologized. The Dietetics Association never apologized. They didn't change anything. It's like it never happened.
That's crazy. But wasn't it also like they only brought like one paper and you had like a stack of it against what they were saying?
So I was very fortunate, because this should have bankrupted me, this whole thing. And that's how the HPCSA works, because they've got financial money. Your taxpayers pay for them, and the medical doctors pay for the HPCSA. So they've got plenty of money. So they can charge whoever they like. It's no consequence. And the lady who charged me, this who laid the claim, there's no problem for her. She doesn't pay any money. She just makes the claim. And then the HPCSA charge you, and you have to have good lawyers. And I had 3 of the best. I mean, I just had astonishing lawyers. 2 of them gave their time to me for free. And when I tell you that support ran into the millions, but not just millions, probably 10 million rand that they donated to me free. Now, without them, I might not have won the case, because the HPCSA also tried to make sure that that the committee that was hearing the case was biased. And the first thing my lawyer said, no, you can't have that lady on. She's a dietitian. But your rules say that only doctors can judge doctors. So if you're a doctor, you get judged by doctors, not by dietitians. So she got kicked off twice. There were 2 kicked off. And then eventually the trial began when we had a reasonable spread of people who were listening to it, and they were medical doctors. So they weren't biased from the outset. So that was the story. But it was a great experience, because I became so close to Dr. Rocky Ramdas, who was my lawyer in chief. He was just phenomenal. We had such a relationship. We actually enjoyed it. We actually enjoyed the trial. And he taught me about Ganesha, by the way, because he's Hindu, and Ganesha is the god of looking after you. He puts challenges there. He puts obstacles in your way, but he finds the answers to your problems. So we would thank Ganesha every day when our problems were solved.
That is interesting. Do you think this trial kind of played a role in putting you in the public eye globally in terms of what the diet was about?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I think so. So, I mean, a month ago, I was given an award from a Polish group of low carbs for upturning the pyramid, or reversing the pyramid. Yes. So it's got to Poland as well. And yeah, that's right.
That is amazing. I also remember there's this famous clip of you where you took your book, Law of Running, and tore the nutrition pages out of it. I think that just shows the integrity of who you are, but you can just tell us a little bit about what happened there.
well, Donnell O'Neill was producing a documentary, because Donnell read the book and he came to Cape Town to see what's going on here. So he came from Ireland. And so he produced this documentary, and then he produced the book, and he said, Tim, I know you don't agree with what you've written. Why don't you just tear out a few pages? So I went and I found the pages and tore them out on screen. And that was, I mean, only a person producing a documentary would suggest that you should do that. But I must tell you that I've spent the last 4 years rewriting that chapter in Law of Running, and I finished it about a week ago. And it's phenomenal how it's changed. And we now understand, we really do understand carbohydrate metabolism in a way that most people haven't a clue. And what it shows me is what's missing is that carbohydrates drive fat accumulation in the body, not fat. And that's the key. And we've got this very delicate carbohydrate balance. And it sets at about 250 grams of carbs a day. If you go beyond that, your body has to get rid of that carbohydrate and turn it to fat. And ultimately that process, and we're not sure quite how it happens, because what's happened now, people look at people who have diabetes and say, well, this is what's happening. Now you're converting carbohydrate to fat and you can't get rid of the fat, but we don't know what happens right at the start. So they're saying, oh, well, you see, that was the problem. You can't convert carbohydrate. You can't get rid of the carbohydrates enough. But we don't know why it starts at the very beginning, because it takes 10 or 15 years for this consistent imbalance in how much carbohydrate you're eating, and that you're trying to get rid of it. And you cope for 15 years or so, and then the system fails. And then when it fails, we know what the position is. You've got diabetes, you've got too much fat in the liver, and you've got insulin resistance. But how you get from the imbalance, and you can't get rid of the carbohydrates, to getting full-blown diabetes is the real question. But what we've shown, which is absolutely novel, and we knew this in 1998, but because we were so carbocentric, we couldn't see it. And what happens is that the glycogen in the muscles is not the fuel for exercise. It's not that for that. It's there as a dump. So one of the ways you control your blood glucose if you're taking too much carbs is you dump it in the muscles. And once you dump it in the muscles, the body can't burn fat. It can only burn carbohydrate. And that's the missing link. And that's why carbohydrate diets work, or low carbohydrate diets work, is because they keep, and why exercise works, because it keeps your muscle glycogen low. And that's key to long-term health. Wow. And so you can keep your muscle glycogen low only two ways: either exercise or a diet, low carb diet, or both. Obviously, the best is both. So that we've uncovered, and it's in the literature. We were one of the first to prove it. And what we did in 1999, we couldn't understand what regulates glucose oxidation in the body. So we infused glucose at high rates into people when they had either muscle glycogens were full of glycogen or the muscles were empty. And when the muscles were empty of glycogen, that carbohydrate wasn't burned. It was amazing. It was obviously being stored somewhere. It wasn't being burned. And then we knew that the control is to drive fat oxidation. When your muscles are empty of carbohydrates, your body will burn fat regardless of what you eat acutely. And so that's the driver of fat oxidation, is absence of carbohydrate.
Wow.
So that's the key. And it's so obvious. And ultimately, as I said, that system, if you continue to overstuff yourself with carbohydrates, you can't burn the fat. You only store it more, and then you get your diabetes, etc., in the long term.
Wow, that actually brings me beautifully to the science part I want to get into. So some quick fire questions. So we've established now that the food pyramid that we've been taught is a lie, and that the fact that we need so much carbohydrates is a lie. But Dr. Noakes, what is the truth? And can you explain the truth for us in layman's terms?
Okay, the truth is, so we've got our conference on starting in 2 weeks' time, and Mickey Ben-Dor is going to be one of the opening speakers. And Mickey is from Jerusalem, and he's been working on what did the Neanderthals eat, because they lived in the Levant in the Middle East, and he's been digging up the bones of these people and what they ate. And he showed they ate elephants. That was the big food that they ate. And then the Neanderthals, unfortunately, they killed off all the elephants, and then they got into trouble and they disappeared. And so what he shows is that the original human diet is high in fat and high in meat, but high in fat is the key. And it was fine. We were fine. We might be small, but we could kill these big animals. And again, there were different techniques used to kill these large animals. But then we ate the fat and we were fine. But then when we killed all of them, then we were left with small, fast-moving antelope. Now we had to get different techniques. We had to track them and run after them and use bows and arrows and things. And so that the brain started developing, because we had to now outthink the animals in different ways. But the problem was that there was no fat in these animals, and therefore we were getting lots of protein, and the body isn't designed to eat lots of protein. We can't deaminate the protein, also our kidneys just can't cope with it. And if you just eat protein, you ultimately die. You have to have fat. So these guys would kill off the healthiest animals which had fat on them. And traditional hunters, if they kill an animal that's got no fat, they almost don't eat it, because they know that it's not going to satiate them and it's not what they need. So then eventually we killed off all those animals, and now none of the animals had any fat on them. And so we had to develop another source, and that was carbohydrate. And that begins in the 18,000 years ago. So to cope with the absence of animal fat, we developed the grains, and then we started eating the grains. But in South Africa, we start eating grains in 1920s. That's when maize becomes the predominant food. And it's because there was this accumulation of people in Johannesburg in the mining industry, and they couldn't there was no food. So we would import maize from Lesotho. And that's when corn became the predominant foodstuff in South Africa. And
Wow.
meat became less available. So that was the problem. That's where our obesity, diabetes problems start, with the importing maize from Lesotho, and then we developed the maize belt in the Transvaal and Gauteng.
So where South Africans, especially Afrikaners, kind of treat pap, for the international use, pap is maize porridge, treat it as like this cultural thing that kind of is part of the culture, but it's a little bit more than 100 years old.
Yeah, that would be correct. Yeah.
Wow. So the truth is, we need fat.
Fortunately, the Afrikaners stuck with their meat, and
yes.
That's why we've got such big rugby players.
I'm very thankful for that. I'm very thankful for that. So the truth is that we need fat, we need protein, and we need animal meat. How bad is the plant-based doctrine that is kind of politically driven or media driven currently?
Yeah, it's very clear the plant-based discipline. You see, I'm just thinking, like, we had our first major conference in Cape Town 2015. And at the time it was, oh, you vegans, the vegans were the enemy, or we were the enemy for the vegans. And that's what we thought it was, but it's not that at all. It's the anti-meat, because they want the zero carbon, whatever, zero fossil fuels. And that scam is what's driving it. So it's purely a scam to stop us eating meat. And that's what it is. And it's not driven by vegans. It's driven by politicians and people who want to get rid of fossil fuels. And so it's totally different, because it's said that the cows produce CO2 or methane, etc., and too much CO2, which is all absolute nonsense. They've shown, for example, that producing rice is much more damaging to the environment than producing meat. But anyway, when I say damaging to the environment, I don't believe either are damaging the environment.
Yes.
But it's purely for people are making a lot of money out of it.
So if somebody buys into that and they go plant-based, would that be healthy for them?
No, because it's an inadequate diet. You're not getting the right proteins. There's some really good studies. You're not getting all the nutrients you need. It's very difficult to make a plant-based diet nutritious. You have to take supplements. And the best supplement is meat and eggs. Those are the two key supplements, and maybe sardines. Those are the three major supplements that you need in your diet.
Well, that brings me to my next question. So I want to go to the other extreme, and that's kind of where I find myself currently with my own diet, is the carnivore diet. What's your thoughts on a meat-only diet? The way I do it is we do meat, predominantly cattle or beef, and we add raw dairy to it. What's your thoughts on the carnivore diet?
Well, I think that's highly healthy, and so a lot of people now are following the carnivore diet, and there's no evidence that it's harmful. The old diet was that you're going to get scurvy and vitamin C deficiency and all the other vitamins. Well, beef has got much more of all the nutrients that you need than anything else, perhaps than eggs. So there's no evidence whatsoever that it's harmful. And there are so many people benefiting and curing what we would call incurable diseases by going carnivore, particularly if you've got autoimmune diseases, which is caused by, I think, by eating some chemicals in plants that are toxic. And that plants are generally toxic because they don't want you to eat them, but whereas meat is not at all toxic. It's absolutely designed for human consumption.
Yeah, I totally agree. What do you make of, so I follow one of the other influencers that I follow in the diet sphere is Dr. Paul Saladino, but he he went from a carnivore diet to what he calls an animal-based diet, and he adds a lot of carbs back into it. And he adds organs and raw dairy, but he says that we need a minimum of 100 grams of carbs, because he says that there is going to be long-term problems with ketosis and adrenaline and so forth, and that he himself experienced it. What is your thoughts on that? Do we really need 100 grams of carbs? I know you've already answered that, but just on the topic of what Paul Saladino is saying.
I think it's very individual, and Paul Mader found that that's his case. I think there's such individual variability. But once you're in my case, like me, and you're insulin resistant, 100 grams will kill you. That's all it'll do. It may be a slow kill, death, but will kill you. And so that's a problem. I think one has to be cautious that Paul has to say, listen, he's healthy and he's not pre-diabetic, and that's fine. You can eat up to 250 grams. If you're not pre-diabetic, up to 250 grams is probably fine, because that's where the balance is. So the basic problem is that our brain burns 150 grams of carbohydrate a day if you're eating a high carbohydrate diet. If you're eating a high fat diet, it's down to 10 grams a day, because you get the rest from ketones, etc. And the liver will provide that 10 grams quite comfortably to your brain. So you've got 150 grams that you can burn in the brain, and then you've got another 100 grams roughly going to muscle for walking around and your heart beating and for your red blood cells. So that's the top. 250 grams a day is the top that a person who's inactive can cope with. Once you go beyond that, you better exercise to get rid of the excess, because you don't need it. And of course, I've said you don't need 250, because if you're adapted to a high-fat diet, you're not going to burn that 150 in your brain. You're going to use much less. So the problem for humans is that we cannot tolerate a high carbohydrate diet. And it's clear that it goes from 250 grams downwards. And if you've got diabetes, it's 0 grams a day you can cope with. But Paul is in the middle there. He can cope with 100, and that's fine. But that's because he's not affected. But people have to realize it's a very individual thing, and the amount of carbohydrate is absolutely critical. A few grams the wrong way and you're in trouble. And that's what we try to make. So Paul is correct for himself, but he's not correct for me. And he's not correct for anyone with pre-diabetes or diabetes.
And that brings me to a second thing. A lot of people would come, and I've heard this from family members and so forth, but you're going to get kidney problems or heart palpitations, sleep problems. Is that true?
No, it's not. The kidney problems and the gallstones are related to the high carbohydrate diets.
Oh, wow.
And kidney disease, the commonest cause of serious kidney disease is diabetes. Absolutely. If you go to a renal unit, you'll see the people on dialysis, almost all of them have diabetes or other rare conditions, but diabetes is the commonest preventable condition. So people who say that you're going to get kidney disease from this is nonsense. There's good evidence now that ketosis helps kidney failure. In pre-kidney failure, ketosis helps reduce the probability that you'll advance to full kidney failure.
Well, it's actually the opposite.
It's as always.
As always. Sorry. What I want to ask as well is a quick thought. What is your thoughts on dairy, and specifically raw dairy?
Yeah, I don't have an opinion. I think that raw dairy, by not pasteurized, is definitely better. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's all the evidence that you destroy a lot of the benefit of milk when you pasteurize it. And there's, Pasteur was a person of dubious credibility. That's all I can say.
Okay.
Yeah, and you see, when he was doing research in the 1880s, there were no ethical boards, so he could do what he liked. And there was no peer review, and there was no oversight. There was no oversight of the research. Everyone just assumed that Pasteur said that was true. And people who attacked Pasteur were demonized, like I was. And yet when they go back and look at his research, it's appalling. It doesn't prove what he said, or he stole the ideas from other people.
Wow.
So Pasteur is not a name that fills me with pride of being a scientist.
Okay, that says a lot. Tell me a bit about what do you make about the blue zones?
Yeah, I mean, that's nonsense. Yeah, the countries that have the longest life expectancy is like Hong Kong, which has the highest meat intake of any country. So by and large, if you look at the meat intake, you can predict longevity.
So like everything is propaganda.
Absolutely. And we used to say it was the vegans. It's not the vegans. It's industry selling their product and this whole net zero nonsense.
What does your diet look like these days?
It's very simple. I just eat meat, fish, dairy, cheese, eggs, and a few vegetables and occasional fruits. So that's
Okay.
it. Yeah.
I like it when it's simple. So, would you say South Africa itself, with maize and so forth and bread being staple, that we are in a bit of a crisis health-wise?
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, but now we have the Eat Better South Africa campaign.
I wanted to ask you about it just now. Yeah.
And we run that in some of the poorest communities in Cape Town. And we reverse diabetes and we reverse carbohydrate intolerance in these communities in people who adopt our diet. And it's not difficult and it's not expensive. You don't eat steak every night. You can just start cutting out the excess, and sugar is one of the keys. I think Gary Taub said that sugar, when you look at obesity and diabetes, sugar is always there. So just telling people to cut out all sugar makes a massive difference already, even before you start eating lots of other animal produce. And the interesting thing is this a great Kenyan friend of mine who we also converted to the high-fat diet. He's a medical doctor in Kenya. He started treating Kenyan patients, and he could reverse diabetes more quickly than happens to Europeans. And I think African people reverse their diabetes more easily on this diet. One of the guys in the clinic who's now one of the people who promotes this low-carb diet is a Zimbabwean. He came in with a glucose which was about 6 or 7 times normal. I mean, that is catastrophic. Within 2 weeks, he'd normalized it, and now he's completely normalized his glucose control. And he's not eating the expensive diet that I'm eating. He's eating a diet that he can afford and which we prescribe. And he's responded like that. Now, I don't think you'd see that in diabetic clinics at Groote Hospital or dealing with European patients. I don't think you'll see that degree of reversal that quickly.
So how you've mentioned a bit of it, and one of the things people say about keto or carnivore is that it's too expensive. How with Eat Better South Africa, what are you guys practically looking at to make it more affordable for people to eat?
Okay, so lots of eggs, lots of vegetables actually, but the non-carb vegetables. That's to give some degree of satiation. So I mentioned eggs, tinned fish. That's a key component because that's cheap. And tinned meat is also a key component. And it's almost what they don't eat that's more important than what they actually eat. And so they cut out all the sugar. That's the key. And we have a kiosk at the hospital or the clinic where we work, and there you have all the sugar things. And they see this, and it's frightening how much sugar is in the foods that they're eating. And no one realizes it, but that's really the beginning. Once you show them how much sugar they're eating, that's the beginning.
How can people get involved with Eat Better South Africa, or even help you guys broaden the impact that you have on the whole South Africa?
Yeah, well, the Noakes Foundation was founded out of the profits of that book, The Real Meal Revolution. So we used that to start a trust, which then helps the Noakes Foundation, which is a tiny organization. And we have incredible results, despite the fact that we're tiny and the impact is relatively small. So I'd encourage people to look at the Noakes Foundation website, and you'll see what we're doing. And the people who fund us, we've just received some really nice funding from America. I mean, it's still not a huge amount, but it's enough to keep us going and allowing us to run these clinics. And I went out to the clinic about a month ago, and we were the people who'd been affected most and who'd benefited most were there, and they were telling their stories. There was one lady whose daughter was there. Her daughter had been in bed for 6 years. She changed the diet and she got out of the bed for the first time in 6 years. Now, I don't know quite what happened, but the mother and the father and the daughter were just over the moon, that they completely changed their lives. And what I realized was that we're not a diabetes clinic, we're a diabetes-free clinic. So if you want to be free of diabetes, you come to our clinic. If you want to have diabetes, you go to that medical clinic. But if you want to be free of diabetes, you come to our clinic. And that was
a testament, yes.
My moment of insight there.
That is very cool. So with Eat Better South Africa, if you guys look up the Noakes Foundation, I'll put that in the show notes. You can go there. All of Prof Noakes information and website links, social media links, everything's going to be in the show notes. I also want to ask you something I forgot to ask. Is there a difference as to how male and females respond to specifically keto, but also to carnivore?
Yeah, that's a great question. There shouldn't be. I've addressed this in running, and it also, the diet doesn't seem to make much difference. It's pretty the same for both genders. So there may be subtle differences, but I don't think that they are of major importance. Okay.
And so I wanted to ask you about the Noakes Foundation. You touched on that. Tell us a bit about the Nutrition Network and also the summit you guys have coming up.
So the Nutrition Network we realized that we were changing individuals one meal at a time. But then we figured that doctors are hugely important because they deal with so many patients, and that their input or influence can be hugely exaggerated. Like you've indicated that you read the book and that your family was influenced. And if you're a doctor, you could have been the same. You went to your doctor and he said, I really think that you should change your diet. That could have had the same impact. So we decided we would change one physician one at a time. And so we started running courses on the internet, and we've been hugely successful. We've run, I forget, probably 8 or 9 courses with lots of doctors from around the world. Very few from South Africa, majority come from around the world. And what we found was that all of them felt completely isolated. They were getting no support in the hospitals. And in fact, if they went low carbs, they were isolated by their colleagues. And so we gave them the opportunity to speak to others who were in the same boat, and also to train them in the low carb diet. And so that you could go through a series of courses and then eventually do this more intensive course and then be qualified as a nutrition practitioner. So that's what we've done there, and it's been hugely successful. So we now have a network of people who are connected around the world promoting the low carb diet. And they're important people. I mean, we've had people who are really influential, who see a lot of patients, from cardiac surgeons who realize that they're wasting their time because they'd rather prevent the disease. The same with diabetologists, that they'd rather prevent the disease before having to treat it. So that's the Nutrition Network, and it's been extremely successful. And we're very proud of its impact globally. It is probably the premier teaching course for low carb diets in the world.
Wow.
What we'd like to do, of course, is be teaching the courses at medical schools, but that would be a long-term goal. And maybe it'll happen sometime, but not quite yet.
And for that, people need to join the movement so that this can go on for generations. Tell me about the World Nutrition Summit that is coming up. What can people expect to see? We're very excited about it. I'll share a bit more on what my listeners can get out of the deal, but tell us a bit more about the summit.
So the first summit we had was 2015 in Cape Town, and we literally had all the premier people who went on to influence the discipline in the next 10 years. So it was amazingly, and we also launched a couple of careers there. Jason Fung was the most obvious one.
Oh, wow.
I heard Jason speak on on YouTube, and I said, we have to have this man at our conference. He paid for himself to come. He gave a brilliant talk. He completely mesmerized everyone. And he's written 3 or 4 of the best books on the low carb. I think he calls them obesity codes and diabetes code and cancer codes. So we launched his career, and there were others who did extremely well. So that was then. Now we've got the next generation of people speaking on where we've gone further now, mental disease, cancer prevention, all the things that we weren't, well, we did talk about a bit about them, but they've become more central. I think in 2015, we were just starting the basics. You know, weight loss was a big thing. It was diabetes, but it wasn't as complete as it is now. So it's an extension of that conference in that now we've got the next generation of speakers who will be speaking on a wide range of topics. And it just keeps driving the message that the science is with us. And we did, I think you may not know, the Nutrition Network produced the first textbook of the low-carb diet, which is astonishing because it wasn't a medical school, there wasn't a university. We put it together with all these people who are in our group, and they provided the information for free. We had 60 different contributors, and it shows that the low-carb diet is the most effective diet ever tested in humans, and it is the most tested, I should say, and it's the most effective.
Wow.
And the evidence is all there. And so when people say that, oh, there's no evidence, well, we just say, well, read the textbook.
What is the textbook's name?
It's called Ketogenics.
Ketogenics.
Ketogenics is a textbook on the low-carb diet.
I'm going to put that on my wish list and try to check that down.
It is. Unfortunately, it's rather expensive, but we don't control the price, and we get very few royalties. But it is expensive, but it's an amazing book. You know, it covers every organ system in the body.
Because we figured that's amazing.
If you want a textbook, it must say, okay, what's happening to the heart, the lungs, the endocrine system, the bones, etc., metabolism.
Who are some of the speakers that people can look forward to if they attend the summit?
Yeah, so the one I'm really looking forward to is Dr. Ben Dorr, who I've mentioned, who was the guy who's shown that the original diet was the high-fat animal diet. And I'm not sure he speaks widely all over the country. And then we have a whole series of other very fine lecturers whom I've actually probably not heard before. And they'll be talking on all the other aspects of the diet that I'm not absolutely an expert in. But that will be dealing with menopause and mental issues, treatment of autism, etc. All these, the microbiome and how that is influenced by diet and what impact that has. Because that's an area that I think is probably going to be the next area, is the microbiome. And how there's a report recently of a lady reversing autism by changing the gut flora, and so those are all interesting things.
That is very interesting. So for my listeners out there, if you want to attend the World Nutrition Summit virtually, you can get a special discount if you use the promo code WNS40. That is WNS40, WNS as in World Nutrition Summit 40. I'll put it in the description box, and when I edit this video, I'll put it on the screen as well, WNS40 for all my listeners. Then, Dr. Noakes, what is your thoughts on Make America Healthy Again that Bobby Kennedy and Carnivore voices like Jordan and Michaela Peterson are running?
Yeah, I was very happy until yesterday. So that it's amazing how things can change. So
what happened yesterday?
What happened yesterday was Trump announced that they're going to continue with the vaccination, the mRNA vaccinations. And he praised the head of Pfizer, who's, to me, is a criminal.
Fauci. Oh, no, that's not Fauci.
The other guy, Buhler, the head of Pfizer. And so there's a complete turnabout. And poor old Kennedy, who has written that Pfizer is a criminal organization, had to stand behind Trump while he was praising the the so-called criminal. And that's just destroyed all my confidence about making America healthy again. And I don't know what Robert Kennedy is going to do about it.
So we'll see.
Yeah, we'll have to see. It may be that Trump has got another trick up his sleeve.
It may be.
But
something that is definitely true about him is that you can't predict what he's going to do.
No, exactly.
So do you think there's a possibility for a similar initiative in South Africa to specifically in terms of nutrition to impact the whole country?
Yeah, I just don't know. I mean, I don't, people have to think ahead and to be able to jump out of their paradigms. And the medical profession in this country is so controlled that, and it's not innovative in any way. So that's the problem. And the Department of Health is controlled by rules. So, for example, we did give some talks in the discussion with the Department of Health. And they said, oh, that's all very well, but we can't do it because these are the guidelines. The dietary guidelines are contrary to what you were saying, so we can't do anything. That's the worry.
It's just like, well, blinders on, this is what they're doing.
Yeah.
Wow.
And even though they might see that it's benefiting themselves or others, they won't do anything about it. Yeah.
That's terrible. Last few questions before we end off. What is one book that you would suggest everybody to read out there?
For nutrition?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's Big Fat Surprise by Nina Teicholz. That was the one that really influenced me and showed how the lies happen and how they recreate the lies. And the science, it just goes out the window. There's no real interest in science. The people the experts, the so-called experts, are just mouthpieces for industry.
Wow.
And I think we really saw that also with the COVID story and the vaccination story, that the experts are all purchased, all bought, and they have no interest in helping us be healthier. So I think Nina wrote that book, and interestingly, it came out just as I was being charged, and it was a lifesaver for me because I said, I knew I was right, but here's the evidence.
Wow.
And she, of course, was one of my expert witnesses. And she continues to lead the fight and is part of Kennedy's team.
Wow.
And so let's hope that they can do something. But it's, as you say, a week ago, if you'd asked me that question, I would have said it's all going to change. Kennedy's going to change the food pyramid in the United States. And food provision to children is going to be better because that's one of the keys. And even last week, Trump said Kennedy must be in charge now with food in the schools. I think that he took it away from the schools, the Department of Education, and gave it to Kennedy. So you've got these two sides of the argument, and it's very difficult to follow what exactly happened.
It is very difficult.
Yeah.
So that's the one book. For people like myself who you kind of find yourself on this roller coaster with the ketogenic diet, and it's mostly because of family members or social pressures. It's not always necessarily cravings, but once you give in, then it's almost as if those carb cravings hit you like a wave, and then you kind of fall off for weeks at a time. So do you have any practical advice for people to not be on that roller coaster?
Yeah, we run a course on food addiction, and that's one of because that we realize is the key factor. If you can't get off your food addiction, your sugar addiction, you're never going to get onto the low carb diet. And we've even shown that people who reverse or manage their type 2 diabetes successfully are the ones who get rid of the sugar addiction, and they control all those cravings. And that's the key. That's why this diet is so amazing, is it controls all your cravings and you get rid of them. And it does exactly what Ozempic does, but it doesn't have any of the complications. And people who are on Ozempic praise it because they get rid of their hunger and they get rid of their cravings. But the moment they stop taking the injections, they're in trouble again. Well, the low carb diet does exactly the same, but there's no downside. That's the key. Wow. So yes, you have to read up about food addictions, and the only way to do it is to use the 12-step approach that the people treating alcohol addiction do. It's exactly the same, except that sugar addiction is more addictive than alcohol. The problem is it doesn't give you all the social problems that alcohol addiction does, but it gives you all the medical complications.
So where can people find this course that you guys have on sugar addiction?
Yeah, on Nutrition Network.
Okay.
And Bitten Johnson, Jonson, is our expert. And she's an amazing lady. She had alcohol addiction, and then she cured her alcohol addiction 30 years ago, and then realized that sugar addiction was identical. Wow. And that sugar addiction is probably the gateway to all addictions. They all come through sugar. And why is that? Because you get exposed to sugar within minutes of being born. as soon as you was weaned, you get introduced to sugar. So that catches you at a very young age.
That is very interesting. And then my last question to you to kind of round us off is, if you could choose your last meal, what would that be?
Oh, T-bone steak, and that would be all.
Okay, I think that's mine as well. With some butter melting on top of it.
Absolutely, yeah.
Oh, wow, that sounds good. Dr. Noakes, thank you very much for the absolute blessing and opportunity, an honor that I had to interview you today. It was really a privilege.
Thank you, Rainer. Well, it was a privilege for me to chat to you. Thank you so much. And thank you for the work that you do. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Religious conviction is terribly important. And that's where the world is wrong, is by getting rid of religion and Christianity and other religions like that. It's absolute disaster. And that's what we're facing. The satanic forces are also behind the what we're dealing with in nutrition.
Yes, I think in a lot of ways, a lot of things are connected. But yeah, thank you very much. And to my listeners, remember, if you want to attend the World Nutrition Summit, it's in 2 weeks' time, if I'm not mistaken. If you want to attend the summit, use the promo code WNS40, and you can get a discount, the World Nutrition Summit. To Dr. Noakes and to all my listeners, this is High Culture. Until next time, goodbye.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.